close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your body settle into wherever you are right now. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to fix or remember. Let your breathing find its own rhythm, slow and easy. Now, somewhere far from here, in a town you've never visited, in a time that doesn't quite belong to any calendar, there is a small stone bakery. It is still dark outside. The air is cold. The room is quiet. And inside, a man is kneeling by the hearth, striking flint against steel for the third time. This time, a spark lands in the dry moss and leaves behind a tiny point of orange light. He leans down, close enough to see it, and breathes gently over it. The small glow grows brighter. He breathes again, slow and careful, and a thin thread of white smoke rises into the cold air. The smell reaches him at once. Dry plant fibers, old ash, and the beginning of fire. One more steady breath, and at last a small yellow flame appears. Fragile, but alive. Now the room begins to change. He feeds the flame with thin twigs, then with slightly thicker ones, building the fire in stages, the way he always has. The twigs darken, catch, and begin to burn. Orange light spreads slowly across the stones. Shadows form on the walls, then soften again as the fire strengthens. The room is still cold, but not as cold as it was a moment ago. A little warmth enters the air and stays there. He leaves the fire to grow and crosses the room toward the barrel in the far corner. It stands against the wall, heavy and familiar, its wooden staves bound with dark iron hoops. He lifts the lid and leans it aside. Inside, cold well water waits in silence, dark and still, reflecting the weak light from the hearth. Nearby, on a stool, rests a clay pitcher. He takes it in both hands. The clay feels cold against his palm. He lowers it into the barrel until water rushes through the narrow neck with a deep, hollow sound. Air escapes in large, soft bubbles. The pitcher grows heavy. He draws it back up, and water slips over the rim in bright drops that strike the barrel below. Then he carries it to the long wooden table. The table stands beneath the faintest edge of morning. Though little daylight has yet reached the room, it is thick, old, and solid, marked by flour, knife lines, heat, and years of labor. The pitcher lands there with a quiet weight. Now he turns toward the sacks. They sit on the floor along the wall, large and heavy, their coarse fabric folded and tied. He bends, takes hold of one, and lifts. The sack presses against his chest. Flour has its own kind of weight, less sharp than stone, less solid than iron, but heavy all the same. He carries it to the trough in the middle of the room and lets it rest on the edge. The trough is made from a hollow trunk, broad and worn smooth in places by many hands and many seasons. He unties the top of the sack and tips it forward. A stream of coarse rye flour falls into the trough. It lands softly, building a gray mound in the dim light. Fine dust rises into the air and settles on his forearms. on his tunic, on the boards of the table, and on the floor nearby. When the sack is empty, he lets it drop aside and reaches again for the pitcher of water. Standing over the flower, he sinks one hand into the center of the mound and turns it in a slow circle. Dry flower moves outward. A hollow forms. He deepens it, making room for the water. Then he lifts the pitcher and pours. Cold water falls into the center of the flower and darkens it at once. The dry edges begin to absorb it. He empties the pitcher and sets it down. Now both hands enter the trough. At first, the mixture is loose, cold, and rough. Flour clings to his fingers. Water gathers at the bottom. He pulls dry flour inward from the sides, folding it into the wet center. Again and again, he repeats the movement, turning powder into paste, and paste into something thicker. The mixture grows heavy. It begins to resist his hands. It becomes dough. Nothing in the process is quick. He works in silence, drawing dry flour inward, pressing, folding, gathering. The fire behind him grows stronger. The room slowly brightens, not from daylight, but from flame, and from the awakening of the oven stones that have begun to warm. When the dough is finally strong enough to lift, he gathers it into his arms and carries it from the trough to the table. It lands there with a dull weight. Now comes the longest part. He places the heels of his hands into the dough and leans forward. The dough yields slowly beneath his hands. Then he folds it back toward himself. He presses again, turns it, folds again. The movements come without thought, learned by repetition, carried by muscle more than mind. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. The rhythm settles into the room, the way the fire has settled into the hearth. His breathing deepens. Each breath comes long and even, matching the rhythm of the room itself. Fine flour dust lifts into the air in pale clouds, and then disappears again. The dough begins to change beneath his hands. It grows firmer, smoother, less rough at the edges. It becomes one smooth, willing mass. He keeps going. There is no reason to hurry. Bread does not reward hurry. Fire, flour, water, and time have their own pace. The baker knows this. His hands know it. Even the room seems to know it. As he works, the first signs of morning reach the outside world beyond the walls. But inside the bakery, the world is still held in an earlier hour. Here, there is only the table, the dough, the fire, and the steady labor of hands that have done this many times before. At last, the great mass is ready. He wipes the back of one wrist across his forehead, then reaches for a broad wooden-handled cutter. He divides the dough and separates the first piece. Then another. Then another. Each portion is set aside. The single mound becomes many smaller ones, each waiting for the next stage of work. He lays down the cutter and takes the first piece in both hands. With practiced motions, he draws the outer edges inward and under, tightening the surface, shaping the dough into a round form. He turns it slightly, tucks again, and seals the underside with his thumbs. Then he sets it aside and reaches for the next. Again, the same movements return. Draw, tuck, turn, tighten. Each piece becomes a loaf. Each loaf joins the others on the table. One by one, the surface of each round smooths and stretches. The line of resting dough grows longer. Small spaces remain between them. The table fills slowly with quiet forms, waiting for the heat of the oven. By the time he finishes, there are 20 of them. 20 loaves in the dim light. 20 quiet promises of bread. Now he turns toward the oven. It waits with its own kind of silence. A silence made not of emptiness, but of held heat. The stone inside has been warming. The dark opening releases a steady breath of hot air into the room. Against the wall rests the long wooden peel, its flat board worn smooth, its handle polished by use. He takes it up. Then he returns to the table, slides the peel beneath the first loaf, and lifts. The dough rests on the wood, pale and soft. He carries it to the oven mouth, lowers the peel, and draws it back, so the loaf settles onto the hot stone inside. A soft sound, a beginning. Then he returns for the next. Again and again he crosses the room, from table to oven, from oven to table. Each trip slow and practiced. The same motion repeats. The same careful angle of the peel. The same lift. The same slide. The same withdrawal. One loaf after another takes its place on the hot floor of the oven. The heat reaches his hands each time he leans in. Still, he goes on until all 20 loaves are inside. When the last one is set down, he hangs the peel aside and reaches for the iron door. Its handle is warm already. The hinges move with a deep, familiar sound as he pulls the heavy door shut. The opening disappears. Behind it, in darkness and heat, the bread begins its quiet transformation. For the first time that morning, the baker pauses. The work is not finished, but the hardest part is done. The dough has been mixed, kneaded, shaped, and given to the oven. Now the fire and the stone must do what hands cannot. He turns back to the room. Flour dust still lies across the floorboards. Ash rests near the hearth. Small traces of work remain everywhere. On the table, shell in a trough, on the front of his tunic, in the dry lines of his hands. He reaches for the broom in the corner. The handle is smooth from long use. The twigs bound at its end are stiff and dry. He lowers the broom and begins to sweep. Forward and back. Forward and back. The bristles scrape the boards and push pale dust toward the hearth. Nothing about the movement is hurried. He works the way he has worked all morning. Steadily, without waste, without drama. Flour gathers in little drifts. Ash joins it. Loose dirt and dust move together in thin gray lines across the wood. The room slowly returns to order. When the sweeping is done, he leans the broom back in its place and stands still for a moment in the warmth. Now the air is changing again. The smell in the bakery deepens. It is not yet the full smell of bread, but something close to it. Warm grain, heated stone, smoke, and the faint sweetness that comes when dough begins to firm and color. The fire in the hearth settles into a quieter burn. Pine logs glow at their edges. A soft crackle moves through the room and fades. The baker walks to the stool and lowers himself onto it. He places both hands on his knees. At last, he is still. He faces the oven door and waits. This waiting is part of the work, too. Not all labor is movement. Some of it is attention. Some of it is knowing when nothing more should be done. So he waits without impatience. His breathing slows. His shoulders drop. The muscles in his arms loosen. The room, which began in cold darkness, now rests in low firelight and a growing warmth. Outside, morning must be rising. Over roofs and chimneys and narrow streets, though only the faintest gray has begun to show at the edges of the shutters. Inside, time moves differently. The oven does its hidden work. The loaves inside begin to rise more fully. Their surface is firm. Pale dough takes color. Moisture leaves them slowly. Crust begins where softness once was. Heat travels inward, steady and invisible, turning wet grain into something nourishing, lasting, and familiar. The baker sits without moving much at all. From time to time, he blinks. Once he shifts one foot against the floor. Once he rubs his thumb slowly against the side of one finger, feeling the flour dried there. But mostly, he remains quiet, watching the iron door, as though he could see through it into the heat beyond. The firelight reaches the walls and floor in soft, uneven shapes. The table stands ready for the loaves to return. The trough is empty now. The pitcher waits beside the barrel. The tools of the morning are all where they should be. The room has settled after labor. And in that stillness, there is a kind of peace. Slowly, the smell grows richer. Now it is unmistakable. Bread, not yet ready to lift from the oven. Not yet ready to cool. Not yet ready to be sold or carried into other homes, but already becoming itself. Warm crust, dark grain, smoke, heat, and the memory of flour. The smell fills the bakery in layers. First faint, then stronger, then so natural to the room that it seems it must always have been there. Outside, the town is waking. A distant sound reaches him now and then. Perhaps a door. Perhaps a voice. Perhaps a cart far off in the street. But none of it enters the room fully. The bakery remains apart, when closed in its own warmth, its own light, its own slow hour between darkness and day. At length the baker rises. Not quickly. Not all at once. He stands and steps toward the oven. He places one hand on the iron handle and feels the heat there. For a moment he does nothing more, as if listening through the metal. Then he opens the door. Hot air moves out around him in a thick, warm breath. Inside, the loaves are there on the stone floor, deeper in color now, their surfaces rounded and firm. He takes up the peel once more and draws the first loaf onto the board. It is heavier now than when it entered, more finished, more certain. He lifts it from the oven and sets it on the table. Then he returns for the next. One by one, the loaves come out into the room, and one by one, they take their places in rows across the wood. Their crusts are darkened by the heat, some more brown than others, some carrying a little extra flour on the surface, some split in small natural seams. They are not all perfectly alike, but together they make a quiet order across the table. The room fills fully now with the smell of fresh bread. It is warm, grain-rich, smoky, and deep. It settles into the walls, into the wood of the table, into the wool of his tunic, into the air itself. The baker sets down the peel and looks over the loaves without haste. There is nothing dramatic in his expression. This is what the morning was meant to become. And it has become it. He leaves the bread to cool. Soon there will be other things. A door to open. A first customer, perhaps. More wood to carry. More flour to lift. More work later in the day. But not yet. For one quiet stretch of time, the bakery belongs only to stillness, warmth, and bread. The man returns to the stool. He sits once more and rests his hands on his knees. Before him, on the table, the loaves release thin heat into the room. The fire burns lower now, doing less work than before. Dawn has begun to soften the darkness at last. The hardest part of the morning is finished. He sits without speaking. He breathes slowly. He lets the warmth gather around him. And in the calm space between labor and the rest of the day, with bread on the table and light slowly entering the room, the old bakery holds its peace. And if you're still listening, you don't need to be. The bread is made. The fire is low. The room is warm. There is nothing left to do. Nothing left to follow. Nothing left to hold on to. You can let this room grow quiet around you now. The way the bakery grows quiet around the baker. Let the warmth stay. Let everything else drift away. Sleep. Tonight, we're leaving the kings alone. No royal court. No temple ceremony. No battle in the desert. No great monument rising against the sky. We're going somewhere smaller. An Egyptian village by the Nile. An ordinary afternoon. So ordinary, in fact, that no one living through it would have thought it worth recording. No scribe would stop to note this hour. Not the sunlight on the mud brick walls. Not the quiet scraping of grain being ground. Not the brief relief of a breeze drifting in from the river. And yet, this is where most of life was lived. So get comfortable. You do not need names tonight. You do not need dates. You do not need dynasties or pharaohs or timelines. You only need to follow the shape of a slow afternoon. It is well past midday now. The busy part of the morning is over. First work of the day has already been done. The sun is still high, but it no longer has the freshness of morning. The light feels heavier now, whiter. Still, it lies across the village without much movement. Across roofs, across walls, across baskets, jars, mats, and tools left near doorways. The houses are made of mud brick, plain walls, earth-colored, sun-dried. Some walls are smoother than others. Some have been patched. Some show rounded wear at the corners where hands, baskets, shoulders, and passing animals have brushed against them again and again. A doorway holds a little pool of shade. A threshold has been polished by bare feet. A low wall has become the natural place to set down a jar for a moment before lifting it again. Nothing here is built to impress. Everything is built to be used. At this hour, the village has slowed, not stopped. Villages do not really stop, but the pace has changed. Work folds itself into narrower spaces, into cooler corners, into doorways where a little air still moves. Near one entrance, a woman sits with a basket in her lap. One side has come loose. She bends one strand back into place, threads another through, tightens it, turns the basket, and begins again. She is not working quickly. There is no reason to. The basket will be finished. If not now, then later. The afternoon is long enough to allow small tasks to take their time. From a shaded room nearby comes the sound of grain being ground. Stone against stone. A low, dry scraping sound. Steady. Patient. Grain shifts. Stone moves. A little more flour gathers. And then the sound begins again. If you stayed here long enough, that sound would stop feeling like an event. It would simply become part of the air. A child appears in the doorway. He stands at the border between shade and sunlight, not quite wanting to help, not quite wanting to be sent away. A quiet voice speaks from inside. The child answers. The answer sounds mildly disappointed, but not surprised. Then he turns and wanders back into the lane. Outside, the ground is warm and dusty. A dog has claimed one narrow strip of shade beside a wall. It lies there with complete seriousness. One ear flicks. One eye opens. Then closes again. A few chickens move through the dust. Peck once. Pause. Take 2 steps. Peck again. Even they seem to understand that this is not the hour for unnecessary effort. From farther off comes a breeze from the Nile. Not enough to change the day. Only enough to be noticed. A hanging cloth lifts. A reed mat stirs at one corner. Someone sitting in a doorway raises their head for a moment and lets the breeze pass over the face before it slips away. The river is not visible from every room, but its presence is everywhere. In the wet smell that sometimes arrives with the wind, in the jars standing against walls, in the damp mark on a shoulder where water has been carried, in the reeds near the bank, in the tide boats waiting by the shore. Even when you cannot see the Nile, the whole village is arranged around the fact of it. Someone tips water from a large clay jar into a smaller vessel. The sound is round and cool. Water striking pottery. The jar is heavy, so it is lowered with care. Nothing is wasted. Not effort. Not water. Not the coolness that lingers on the outside of the clay for a short while afterward. And somewhere nearby, another scent has begun to gather. At first it is faint, warm, almost sweet. Then it grows richer, more certain, more familiar. Bread, not lifted from the oven yet, not cool enough to handle, not ready to be carried across the lane to another household. Just bread in that in-between stage, still finishing itself in heat and clay and waiting. You can imagine the dough prepared earlier, before the day became too hot. Flour worked with water, a little salt, perhaps a bit of starter saved from before. No written recipe, no need for one. This is knowledge held in hands, in memory, in repetition. On one of the flat roofs, flax fibers have been spread out. Some are drying. Some are being sorted. Some have already begun to look less like plant and more like the beginning of linen. A person crouches there with a bundle beside them. One section is pulled straight. Another is laid aside. Another is checked and worked again. From the roof, the village looks softer. One roof after another. A mat left out in the light. A jar near a low parapet. A neighbor shaking out a cloth. Another pausing for a moment, doing nothing obvious at all, perhaps simply because the breeze is better up here. Below, in a dimmer room, someone twists fiber into thread. Pull. Turn. Smooth. Pull. Turn. Smooth. It is patient work. The sort of work that asks for attention, but not strain. The hands already know what to do. The body has learned the sequence. The thread lengthens a little at a time. Small progress. Real progress. That may be one of the quietest differences between their world and ours. So much of life here is visible. A cracked basket can be repaired or it cannot. Grain becomes flour. Fiber becomes thread. Dough becomes bread. Water carried from the river is either in the jar or it is not. The work is slow, but it is legible. By evening, you can often see exactly what your hands have done. At the edge of another house, an older man sits with a staff beside him. He does not look busy. That is not the same thing as doing nothing. He watches the lane. A child sent on an errand. A woman carrying a bowl out and bringing it back fuller. A goat wandering too close to where it should not be. A jar placed carefully in a patch of shade. He has likely seen thousands of afternoons like this. Dusty ones. Windy ones. Slightly cooler ones. Afternoons that felt endless while they were happening and ordinary once they were gone. Beyond the last houses, the fields are quieter now than they were in the morning. A hoe may be leaning against a wall. A basket may be resting beside a channel. The irrigation ditches catch pieces of light and throw them back in thin, bright lines. Nothing there is forgotten. It is simply waiting for the better hour. The hour when the light softens. The hour when the body can move more willingly again. People here would not have described themselves as holding ancient agricultural wisdom. They would have said, if they said anything at all, that some tasks are done now and some later. That the river rises when it rises. That the soil behaves one way when wet and another when dry. That seeds cannot be argued with. That the weather keeps its own timing. Knowledge often sounds simple when it has been fully absorbed. Down by the bank, boats rest against the shore. A rope knocks lightly against wood. Slow. Irregular. Reeds bend. Recover. A man may be checking a knot. Or perhaps he checked it some time ago and is simply standing there for a minute, one foot in the shade, looking out over the water before returning to whatever comes next. The river moves with complete indifference to the pace of the village. Older than the houses, older than the baskets, older than the concerns of anyone living this one small day. And still, every part of the village depends on it. Back in the lane, two children crouch beside a wall where the shade has widened enough to be useful. One draws a line through the dust with a stick. The other places pebbles along it in a pattern that matters greatly for 1 minute, and not at all after that. A short disagreement begins, then disappears. One of them finds a curled scrap of reed and stands it upright like a tiny boat. It falls over at once. This is apparently very funny. A pigeon lands on a roof edge with a brief flutter of wings, then settles. Someone shakes out a cloth. Dust catches the sunlight for a second, then thins into the air. A goat noses at a basket. A hand guides it away. From inside one room comes the faint knock of pottery being set down on a hard floor. None of these sounds break the quiet. They are what the quiet is made of. If you had to describe the afternoon in one word, it would not be silence. It would be balance. Stone on grain. Water and clay. A footstep in dust. A bird on a roof. A child speaking and then forgetting what was said. The smell of bread holding its place in the warm air. Everything sits where it belongs. That may be why an ordinary village can feel so restful to imagine. Nothing here is building toward a revelation. Nothing is racing. Nothing is trying to impress us. This hour has no climax hidden inside it. It does not need one. It only needs to keep unfolding the way real afternoons do. A little work, a little waiting, a little shade, a little hunger beginning, a little wind from the river. Now the light begins to change. Not quickly enough for anyone to mention it, but enough. A wall begins to hold more color. A patch of white glare withdraws from the ground. The heat is still there, but it no longer presses with quite the same force. The village has held itself still through the brightest part of the day. Now, slowly, it begins to loosen. More people are moving again. A stool is carried outside. A bundle that has been waiting by a doorway is lifted. Someone straightens a back after sitting too long. Someone else checks the oven again. The smell of bread has deepened. Another household has started thinking about the evening meal in a more practical way now. A jar is opened. Lentils are looked at. Onions are counted. A few herbs are moved from one bowl to another. A cooking place is brushed clear. Not the meal itself yet. Only the small movements that come before the first true motion. There is something very human about this part of the day. The part where hunger has not quite arrived, but dinner is already present in thought. Where work is not over, but it is changing kind. Where the body quietly begins to plan for comfort. Water set ready. A bowl near at hand. Fuel gathered closer. A cloth folded. A child called back toward home. If we were telling the sort of story people usually tell about ancient Egypt, we would leave now and go looking for larger things. A palace. A tomb. A procession. A decree. But most lives were not lived there. Most lives were lived here. In rooms that became too warm by mid-afternoon. In doorways chosen for airflow. In hands that kept mending what could still be mended. in the decision to wait for better light before returning to the fields. That is not the dramatic version of history. It is simply the version that filled most human hours. And maybe that is why it feels gentler. It asks less from us. It does not insist on awe. It only asks that we notice. Notice the polished threshold, the repaired basket, the half-ground grain, the damp mark left by a water jar, the roof where flax is spread, the child drawing a line in the dust, the old man watching the lane without seeming to, the bread still inside the oven. These are small things, but they are not trivial. They are the structure of a day, and days laid one over another are what a life becomes. The shadows are longer now, still short perhaps, but longer. The dog gets up at last, turns once, lies down again in a better patch of shade. The pigeon remains where it landed, perfectly committed to doing almost nothing. The children are quieter. The grinding continues somewhere, but less steadily than before. Perhaps the bowl is nearly full. Perhaps the hands doing the work have grown tired. Perhaps that task, too, is almost ready to pause. Another breath of river air moves through the lane. A little cooler now. Or perhaps it only feels cooler because the worst of the heat has passed. Either way, the effect is the same. A shoulder lowers. A face softens. The day no longer feels like something to endure. It feels like something beginning, very slowly, to release its grip. And you can loosen with it. There is nothing left to keep track of. No test at the end. No detail you must remember. The basket can remain half repaired. The grain can sit in its bowl. The bread will be lifted when it is ready. The evening meal will be made whether or not we stay to watch the first flame catch. For now, it is enough to remain here. Mud brick walls storing the warmth of the day. Dust soft under careful feet. A clay jar in the shade. A roof where flax lies drying. A dog asleep again. A child finally called inside. A river moving beyond the fields, beyond the reeds, beyond the houses, patient as ever. This afternoon has not tried to be remarkable. It has only been itself. And because of that, it has become calm. A plain hour in a plain village. Useful work. Small comforts. Measured effort. Nothing more. Nothing less. So let the details blur now. You do not need to see every doorway clearly. You do not need to count the jars. You do not need to follow the children. You do not need to watch the flour gather grain by grain. Let the village soften at the edges. Let the roofs and walls and lanes and reeds and boats drift together into one quiet place. The sun lowers. The heat eases. The shadows stretch. The river goes on moving. And somewhere in an ancient Egyptian village, a slow afternoon passes into evening, as countless others did before it. Not grandly, not loudly, just naturally. You can rest here a little longer, with the warm wall, with the smell of bread, with the low scrape of stone on grain fading in and out, with the faint breath of the Nile in the air, with the sense that the day, after holding itself still for so long, has finally begun to exhale. And while it does, you can do the same. Slowly, quietly, without effort, without needing anything more from the afternoon. without needing anything more from yourself. Rest now. The village will manage the rest of the evening without us. The bread will be lifted. The bowls will be filled. The last light will leave the walls. And the river will keep moving in the dark. You do not need to follow any farther. You can simply let the sound of this old, familiar world grow softer and softer until it is only warmth and distance and sleep. Tonight, we are not following a battle, a king, or a voyage across dangerous water. We're staying in one place. We're spending an ordinary day in a Viking settlement. A quiet day. A repetitive day. A day made of smoke, damp boards, wool, wooden bowls, and chores that return every morning. So settle in. Let your breathing slow a little. And imagine a small settlement near a cold northern shore, where the houses sit low against the wind, where the paths are worn into the ground by many feet, and where the air often carries the smell of salt even before the sea comes into view. It is still early when the house begins to wake. The longhouse is dim, and for a few moments there is almost no difference between sleep and waking. There is only a faint grayness where the dark had been complete, and the soft outline of the hearth in the middle of the room. You are lying on a sleeping bench along the wall, wrapped in wool that has kept some of yesterday's warmth. Outside the blanket, the air is cool. Inside the house, the air smells of smoke, timber, damp cloth, and ash. Someone shifts in sleep. Someone breathes out slowly. From the center of the room comes the low crackle of embers that lasted through the night. Soon someone rises. Bare feet or soft shoes move across the floor. Ash is nudged aside. A few pieces of dry kindling are laid carefully above the embers. A breath is given to the fire. A faint glow gathers. Then another. The room begins to return. The rafters are darkened by years of smoke. The beams hold steady above. A kettle hangs near the hearth. A chest rests under the wall. A folded garment lies on a bench. Shoes wait where they were left the evening before. A wooden bowl, used many times, catches a little of the growing light. Nothing in the house is there by accident. Things are kept because they are useful. They are repaired because making new things takes time. They are passed from hand to hand because daily life depends on ordinary objects staying in service. People begin to dress. Layers of wool first. A tunic. Leg wrappings. A dress. A shawl. A belt. A cloak kept nearby in case the air outside is sharper than expected. The cloth is not soft in the way modern cloth is soft. It is heavier. It holds warmth. It keeps working in damp weather. Some garments are newer. Others have been mended more than once. A seam has been stitched again. A cuff has been reinforced. A small worn place has been patched before it could grow larger. There is little conversation yet. Morning is the part of the day when the hands begin first. The fire grows strong enough for a pot to be set over it. Breakfast begins in a simple way. Porridge, perhaps. A little bread left from the day before. Curds, butter, or broth warmed again. Dried fish if there is some at hand. Nothing elaborate. Nothing meant to surprise anyone. The smells are plain and familiar. Warm grain. Smoke? A little sourness from dairy. Maybe salt. Maybe fish. Wooden spoons touch the sides of bowls. A small sound of eating. A quiet cough. The scrape of a bench against the floor. Outside, the settlement is only beginning to show itself. When the door opens, cold air comes in immediately. It carries the smell of damp earth, old wood, and sea wind. If rain fell in the night, the ground is dark and slick. If the weather held, there is dew on the grass and a thin chill in the morning air. The buildings stand close enough for voices to travel between them. Low buildings. Practical buildings. Walls built to keep weather out. Roofs thick with turf or thatch. Sheds for tools. Places for drying fish. Fences for animals. Piles of wood stacked where they can dry, as well as the weather allows. A narrow path leads toward the shore. Another bends toward grazing land or worked ground beyond the houses. The day begins in small movements. Someone crosses the yard carrying water. Someone else opens a gate. An axe begins its steady sound in the distance. A child is sent on a short errand and walks off with great seriousness. Nearby, an animal calls into the cold morning air. The animals are part of everything. If a household keeps cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, or chickens, they shape the day from the start. Pens are checked. Feed is brought. Water is carried. Milk is taken when it can be taken. A latch is tested. A fence line is looked over. If an animal is restless, someone notices. If one has slipped where it should not be, someone walks after it. It is easy to imagine the past in large events, but much of it is made of this. A bucket carried carefully. A gate pushed shut again. Hands moving through wool. A pail set down on wet ground. A shoulder leaning into work before the light has fully settled over the day. You might spend the morning near the sheep. They stand close together, carrying the smell of lanolin, earth, and weathered fleece. Hands move over their wool, feeling for dampness, roughness, or places that need attention later. The fleece is not just warmth on the animal. It is future thread, future cloth, future bedding, future repairs. Later, under shelter or near good light, wool will be cleaned and sorted. Some of it will be teased apart by hand. Some will be set aside. Some will be spun. And spinning takes time. Perhaps that is your work for part of the morning. You sit on a bench near the doorway, or just outside where the light is better. Beside you is a bundle of wool. In your hand is a spindle. The fibers are drawn out slowly. The spindle turns. Twist gathers into thread. The spindle turns again. The motion is steady and quiet. Your fingers feel small changes in the wool as you work. A rough place. A knot in the fibers. A thinner stretch. A smoother one. The thread lengthens little by little. Nearby, another person mends a sleeve. A piece of cloth is folded, turned, and stitched. A child watches for a while and then looks elsewhere. The spindle keeps turning. This work does not ask for hurry. It asks for attention. It asks for patience. It asks for the kind of calm that can remain with one motion for a long time. If spinning is not your task, then perhaps grain is. A hand quern waits where it usually stands. Grain is poured in. The upper stone is gripped and pushed. Round and round it goes. Meal gathers below. The sound is low and regular. After a while, the shoulders begin to feel the work. The arms understand it. A little dust catches in the air. You pause, adjust your hands, and begin again. Bread never shows how much labor came before it. The grinding, the carrying, the storing, the careful use of what is left. All of that is hidden once it becomes food on a board. By mid-morning, more of the settlement is awake. More smoke rises from the roofs. More voices carry in the open air. Dogs move quietly between houses. A tool is asked for. A basket is lifted. A bundle is carried from one building to another. Season matters. If it is spring, there are fences to repair and ground to prepare. If it is summer, there is grazing, drying, cutting, carrying, and the use of every long hour of light. If it is autumn, there is gathering, salting, smoking, storing, and counting what will be needed later. If it is winter, there is less travel and more endurance. More work done close to shelter. More attention given to what is already stored inside. Beyond the houses are fields or cleared ground that took time to make usable. Stones rise from the soil again and again. Mud forms where no one wants it. Wood swells in damp weather. Ropes wear. Handles loosen. Nothing stays in good order for long without hands returning to it. And hands do return to it. Someone carries a bundle of sticks. Someone brings a rope. Someone sharpens a blade. Someone gathers a tool left leaning against a wall. Someone makes another trip for water because one trip was not enough. Around midday, there is time to stop for a little while. Not a long pause. Just enough to sit, eat, and let the body rest before standing again. The meal is simple. Bread, cheese, fish, broth, leftovers from the previous evening if there are leftovers to spare. People sit where they can. On a bench. On a low step. On a piece of timber. On dry ground, if the ground is dry enough. This is when conversation has room to return. The weather. A damaged net. A roof that should be repaired before the next hard rain. A boat expected along the shore. A relative who may arrive in a few days. A pig that got loose. A path that has turned soft after rain. News arrives slowly here. A traveler brings one piece of it. A neighbor brings another. A story moves through 2 or 3 houses and changes a little each time. What matters most, though, is still close by. A gate that closes properly. A store of grain that remains dry. Enough wood. Enough hay. A boat that holds together. A roof that does not give way in bad weather. After the meal, the day opens out again. If the settlement lies near the shore, some people go down toward the water. The path is worn by many feet. It may be damp. It may be uneven. At the edge of the landing place, boats rest above the reach of the tide. They are checked as carefully as any other tool. A rope is handled and coiled again. Tar is warmed and worked into seams. A board is examined. Oars are moved into place. Nets are lifted, shaken, and hung. Fish are cleaned on a board that has already seen the same work many times before. The air near the shore has its own smell. Salt, seaweed, wet wood, fish, tar, cold air moving above dark water. A modest catch is still useful. A poor catch changes the next day's work. Nothing from the water is taken for granted. Some days a trader arrives. Not always, but often enough that people look when a different boat appears. There may be metal goods, cloth, beads, a sharpened blade, a better comb, a buckle, a small object from farther away than most people in the settlement will travel that year. Trade does not need to be loud. A thing is lifted, turned in the hand, compared against what is already owned, measured against what can be given for it. Sometimes silver changes hands by weight. Sometimes a promise is enough for now. Sometimes nothing is bought, and yet the looking itself becomes part of the day. Back among the houses, other work continues. Wood is cut and stacked. A handle is replaced. Leather is scraped and softened. A pot is cleaned. Fish are turned where they hang to dry. Cloth is checked where it was left in light and air. A beam is steadied and lifted into place. A door is tested after repair. A latch is adjusted so it will catch more cleanly. Children pass through all of this, never very far from the work around them. They carry kindling. They fetch small things. They watch. They forget what they were asked to do. They remember again. They stand in the wrong place and are moved gently aside. They learn by being near the same tasks over and over. Older people are part of the day too. They may not carry the heaviest load now, but they know where things are kept. They know what was done in other winters. They know which fields hold water. They know how much salt was needed in a year when fish were plentiful and in a year when they were not. They know which repairs can wait and which should be done now, while there is still light. By late afternoon, the quality of the light begins to change. The day does not stop, but it begins to fold inward. Animals must be checked again. Water must be brought in. Loose items must be gathered. Cloth left out must be taken back under cover. Tools must be found before they disappear into grass, mud, or darkness. One more trip to the shed. One more armful of wood. One more look at the sky. One more gate checked by hand. Then more smoke rises from the houses as evening fires are fed. Inside the longhouse, the warmth is fuller now than it was in the morning. The room is brighter close to the hearth and dimmer at the edges. Steam rises from a pot. A ladle moves slowly through it. Something thickens over the fire. The evening meal gathers itself in the usual way. Grain, fish, roots, herbs, bread broken by hand, butter if there is enough, meat perhaps if meat is there to be used, ale poured carefully. People come indoors carrying the day on them, smoke in their clothing, mud at the hem, a little damp still in their shoes, wool fibers caught on sleeves, hands smelling of milk, leather, fish, wood sap, or tar. The meal is not hurried. Bowls are filled. A spoon touches the side of wood. Someone shifts on the bench to make room for another person. A child reaches too soon and is guided back to wait a little longer. Then everyone begins. This is often the quietest part of the day. Not silent, just narrowed. The tasks that remain can be done close to the fire. A tear in a garment is stitched in the evening light. A shoe is turned toward warmth, but not so near that the leather dries too hard. A knife is wiped and put away. A length of cord is checked. Wool is spun again, slowly, while conversation comes and goes around it. Someone remembers a winter when the snow stood high against the outer wall. Someone speaks about a boat expected in a few days. Someone says the roof should be looked at before the weather changes again. A child asks a question. An older voice answers in a calm, unhurried way. This, how memory rests in a place like this. In repeated talk. In practical advice. In stories told close to the fire. In small corrections given from one person to another. In the ordinary sharing of what must be remembered. Outside, darkness settles over the settlement. The path between houses is harder to see now. The shore becomes a darker shape within the dark. The animals shift in their pens. The wind touches the walls and moves along them. Inside, the house feels smaller at night and safer. Here are the things that matter before sleep. The fire, the tools, the food, the blankets, the people under the same roof. The knowledge that the day's work has been done well enough for now. The fire burns lower. Bowls are stacked. Water is drunk. Ash is settled. A bench is cleared. A child too sleepy to finish speaking is wrapped and laid down. A cloak is folded and used as another layer against the night air. Someone checks the latch at the door. Someone looks once more at the hearth. Someone says there's enough wood inside for morning. No one speaks very loudly now. The bedding is drawn close again. You lie down where you began, along the wall, wrapped in wool that still holds the smell of smoke. The timbers creak softly as the house cools around the fire. Breathing slows in the dark. The light from the hearth settles from flame to glow, and the ordinary day comes to its end. No battle, no great return, no event that will be remembered far away. Still, much was done. The fire was kept. Animals were fed. Water was carried. Wool was spun. Grain was ground. Fish were cleaned. A meal was made. A gate was checked. A roof was considered. Tools were put away. The people of the house went out into the cold and came back before night. That is enough for one day. Tomorrow will likely begin in much the same way. The same smoke in the rafters. The same careful search for dry kindling. The same bowl. The same spindle. The same path to the shore. The same gate that resists a little in wet weather. The same animals waiting to be fed. The same hands returning to work in the gray light before sunrise. And so the settlement holds together through repeated work, through ordinary skill, through tasks done at the right time, through the quiet habit of knowing what must be done before rest can come. So now let the house grow darker. Let the embers settle lower. Let the wind move past the walls. And let this small Viking settlement, with its damp paths, warm bowls, wool thread, drying fish, low roofs, and evening fire, drift slowly into sleep. Tonight, we are not following a great general, or a poet, or a fleet crossing dark water towards some famous war. We are going somewhere quieter. We are going to spend time in a small Greek town, and not on an unusual day. Not during a festival. Not during a procession. Not on the day important news arrives. Just an ordinary day. A day of warm stone, narrow streets, clay jars, woven cloth, bread, olive oil, and the slow movement of light from morning into evening. So settle in. Let your breathing become slower. And imagine a small town in the Greek world many centuries ago, perhaps not far from the sea, perhaps on a rise above it, where houses stand close together, where footsteps wear the same paths again and again, and where daily life is made not of grand moments, but of repeated tasks carried out in the right order. The day begins before the heat. At first, there is only a soft paling in the sky, and then a little more light along the edges of the roofs. The town is still mostly quiet. A bird makes a low, soft sound from a wall or a fig tree. Somewhere a dog sleeps quietly in the dust, shifting only once before becoming still again. The air is cooler now than it will be later, and people who know the shape of the day know the value of that coolness. Inside the house, someone is already awake. The room still holds the heaviness of night. Blankets have warmth in them, but the floor beneath bare feet, is cooler. The walls are plain. A doorway is open just enough to let in the first gray light. A clay lamp that burned low through the dark hours has been put out, and the room smells faintly of oil, ash, cloth, and sleep. The house is not large. The rooms are practical. If there is a courtyard, it matters as much as any room inside. The household is arranged around use. Storage jars, baskets, stools, folded cloth, tools, a hand mill, a loom, cooking vessels, and the ordinary objects that move from hand to hand every day. Somewhere in the house, grain is being measured. Water is checked. A door bolt is lifted. A jar is moved. Someone ties back their hair. Someone folds bedding and sets it aside so the room can become something else for the day. In a house like this, the same space is often used for many things in the course of one long day. The first meal is simple. Perhaps bread from yesterday. Perhaps a few olives. Perhaps goat cheese. Perhaps watered wine, or water brought fresh enough to still feel cool. No one expects breakfast to be remarkable. The point is not pleasure first. The point is to begin. Outside, the town slowly comes into focus. The streets are narrow in some places, wider in others, bending where the ground bends, not laid out for the convenience of anyone who will come later. Stone underfoot. Packed earth in some stretches. A worn threshold. A low wall still holding a little of yesterday's warmth and giving it up slowly to the morning air. The houses stand close together, some plain, some better kept, some with painted plaster fading in the weather, some with only stone, light, and dust. The town may be near the sea, or close enough that the smell of salt reaches it when the air moves in the right direction. If you walk early enough, that smell is still mixed with cooler things: damp stone, ashes from cooking fires, olive wood, fig leaves, bread beginning somewhere nearby, and the faint animal smell of a place where people and work remain close together. One of the first tasks is water. Water is always one of the first tasks. Someone takes a clay jar or a bronze vessel and heads toward a spring, a fountain house, a cistern, or whatever source the town depends upon. The path is familiar enough that it hardly requires thought. Down one street, past a wall where the plaster has chipped away, around another corner where the ground is smoother from use, across a stretch of stone that becomes dusty in summer and slick in winter. Others are already there. A few quiet voices. A little waiting. Water striking stone. The cool, hollow sound of a jar being filled. This is a part of town life that never really leaves the day. Water must be brought and then brought again. A full vessel must be lifted carefully. A shoulder shifts under the weight. A hand steadies the curve of the jar. The walk back is slower than the walk there. By now, more doors are open. A child stands in a doorway, still properly waking. An older person has already taken a stool outside to feel the early air before the stronger heat arrives. Someone is sweeping dust away from a threshold, though the street will gather more of it before long. Someone else shakes out a cloth. From deeper inside a house comes the low, repetitive turning of a hand mill. That sound belongs to the morning as much as light does. Stone turns against stone. Slowly, steadily. Grain becomes meal through effort, not by being wished into flour. Arms move. Hands keep their place. A little flour dust gathers. The body notices the work long before the day is finished, noticing the body. Elsewhere, someone is spinning wool. A basket of fibers rests at one side. The spindle turns. Thread draws out little by little. The movement is familiar enough to continue while listening, while watching, while speaking only a little. In a small Greek town, cloth is not a background detail. It is labor, time, necessity, and care. Thread must be made before cloth can be woven. Cloth must exist before clothing can be mended, blankets repaired, children dressed, and household needs met. At a loom, another part of this same quiet labor is already underway. The loom stands against a wall or under shelter, weighted threads hanging in patient vertical lines. Hands pass the weft through. The pattern grows slowly. Nothing about it is hurried. Nothing about it is careless either. A household that keeps good cloth does so because many small motions have been repeated faithfully. As the sun rises higher, the town becomes more fully itself. Voices increase. Sandals on stone. A donkey led through a lane. A potter carrying work to be fired or sold. A boy moving on an errand through the narrow streets. Someone calling softly from one doorway to another. Someone asking whether bread is ready. Someone else asking whether oil has been brought in yet. The small market area, if the town has one, begins to gather people. Not a grand market of noise and spectacle. Just a modest place where goods change hands, where news is traded along with figs or fish, where one person knows who has oil to sell and another knows whose olives were better last season, and someone else is already discussing what the weather may do in the coming days. There may be onions, garlic, lentils, bundles of herbs, olive oil in jars, cheese wrapped in cloth, fresh bread if one is early enough, dried fish if the sea is near, pottery set out in rows. A few smaller goods that are not strictly necessary, though even these tend to become practical once they are taken home and used long enough. The smell of the market is not one smell, but many held together by warmth. Olives, dust, fresh bread, cheese, oil, fish, sun on wood, warm clay, figs if they're in season, and the human smell of a place where people stand close enough to speak without raising their voices. But even here, life is not fast. A purchase is considered. A jar is turned in the hand. A loaf is weighed first by feel. A question is asked. A second question follows. Nothing moves in haste, though much still needs to be done before the middle of the day. The town itself seems shaped by this rhythm. Morning outward. Midday inward. Evening outward again, a little. If you walk farther, beyond the market and into another lane, you may come to a workshop. Perhaps a potter's yard. There are bowls drying in rows, cups stacked near a wall, larger jars waiting with handles fixed and smoothed. Clay is everywhere, under fingernails, on the wheel, on the floor, in the air, as a faint dry scent. A vessel begins as a rounded weight and rises gradually under steady hands. A bowl widens. A lip is formed. A surface is smoothed with patience rather than speed. Or perhaps there is a smith nearby. Not a spectacle. Only work. Heat. Care. Metal shaped because something useful needs shaping. A hinge. A fitting. A blade that must keep its edge. A tool that is repaired because repair is often more practical than replacement. Or perhaps the town's work is more tied to olive oil, wine, fishing, or trade. A small harbor may lie below, with boats pulled up near the shore, nets hanging to dry, rope coiled neatly, and men who spend much of the morning checking what must be checked before anything else begins. The sea, when it is near, is part of daily thought, even when one is not looking at it. How calm it is, whether the wind will change, whether fish have been worth the effort, whether a small boat has come in from somewhere else, whether word has arrived with it. Not always great political word. More often, practical word. Prices, relatives, repairs, cargo, shortages, whether farther along the coast. By late morning, the sun has changed the feel of everything. The stone streets that were pleasant earlier now hold light more firmly. Walls begin to give off warmth. Shade matters more. In doorways, beneath awnings, under vines, people slow a little. Inside the house, work continues in a different mood. A meal is prepared for later. Lentils washed, onions cut, herbs crushed, oil poured, bread broken, perhaps fish cleaned, perhaps beans boiled, perhaps a pot set over coals to do its work gradually, while other tasks continue around it. Cooking in such a house is not separate from the rest of life. It is woven through everything else. A hand stirs the pot, then reaches for a jar. Someone checks the loaf, then returns to sewing. Someone tastes, adds a little more salt, and then goes to the doorway to call another person in from the street. In another room or another corner, garments are mended. A sandal strap needs attention. A hem has worn thin. A tunic must be patched before the tear becomes larger. Hands move with the economy of people who understand that cloth and leather carry labor in them and cannot be treated carelessly just because they have aged. Children move through all of this, close to the life of the household. They are sent to fetch small things. They forget. They are told again. They watch a loom, a cooking pot, a knife, a jar, a patch of light moving across the floor. They ask questions when adults are busy and become quiet when answers are delayed. They learn less from formal instruction than from repeated nearness. By midday, the town grows quieter. Not empty, just quieter. This is the hour when sunlight presses down hard enough to change behavior. Streets brighten. Stone reflects heat. The air seems to stand still in the open places. Doors are drawn partly closed against the glare. Shutters narrow the light. Those who can move indoors or into shade. Those who must still work outside shorten their movements and think already of water. The midday meal is simple and practical. Breaking bread, passing olives, slicing cheese, a little stew from the pot, eggs if the season is kind, more water, perhaps watered wine. Nothing ornate, nothing designed to impress anyone. People sit on stools, benches, low walls, or the floor. A bowl is passed. Someone tears bread and gives the smaller piece to a child without making ceremony of it. A jug is tipped. A hand wipes sweat from the neck. Voices are lower now. This middle part of the day belongs partly to stillness. Not sleep for everyone, though perhaps some do sleep. More often just a slowing. Someone sits in a courtyard mending a fishing net, where the light is good but not too sharp. Someone leans against a wall and does nothing at all for a little while, which is also part of getting through the day. Somewhere a loom remains still for an hour. Somewhere a donkey stands in shade, flicking flies away with its tail. Somewhere the town seems to hold itself in quiet. If you were walking now through the streets, you would hear smaller things. A fly at a wall. A spoon set down inside a house. A murmur from a shaded room. Sandals approaching, then fading. Water poured into a basin. The slow turning of a wooden wheel. The sea, perhaps, if the town is close enough and the wind kind enough to carry it. This is also when the town feels most physical. The brightness of plaster, the heat held in stone, the coolness of a shaded doorway, the roughness of a clay jar against the palm, the smell of warm olive wood, the softness of worn cloth, the weight of air that has not yet begun to cool. And this, perhaps, is one part of what life felt like here. Not only what people did, but what they felt with their bodies as the hours changed around them. Cool floor at dawn, warm bread in the hand, the weight of water on the shoulder, dry dust along the street, a little oil on the fingertips, sun on the back of the neck, shade as relief, the smooth rim of a cup, the coarseness of woven cloth, evening air returning at last. Later in the afternoon, the town wakes into motion again. Not suddenly. Gradually, a door opens wider. Someone steps back into the lane. A basket is lifted. A child runs where earlier there was too much heat to bother. From the harbor, from the workshop, from the edge of the fields, people begin to return or reappear. The market space has changed by now. Some goods are gone. Some sellers are packing. A few conversations that began in the morning are still continuing, only more slowly now. A new piece of news has arrived and is already being repeated from one voice to another. If there is a small shrine or temple nearby, Someone may stop there too. Not for a dramatic scene, just a pause, a small offering, a familiar gesture, a moment folded into the day rather than standing apart from it. Religion here is not always a large emotion. Often it is habit, place, custom, timing, recognition, a flame, a few grains, a quiet word, a hand touching stone, polished by many other hands. Toward evening, household work gathers itself again. Another trip for water because the first was for the day and this is for the night. More grain measured, oil checked, lamps prepared, the fire fed, the courtyard swept once more. The animals, if there are animals kept near the house, seen to before dark. The evening meal begins to form. Perhaps lentils with oil and herbs. Perhaps barley bread. Perhaps fish roasted or stewed. Perhaps beans. Perhaps a few greens. Perhaps wine diluted before it is poured. The smells deepen as the heat of the day begins to lift. This is one of the gentlest hours. The sun lowers. Light turns warmer on the upper parts of walls. The streets that seemed too bright at midday now soften. Conversation becomes easier. People who stayed apart during the hottest hours step back into shared space. A stool is brought outside. A child sits on a step. Someone shells beans. Someone untangles thread. Someone simply watches the lane. In a small town, evening belongs partly to neighbors, not always in intimate ways. Sometimes simply in the shared presence of being outdoors at the same hour. One person asks after another's mother. Someone comments on the heat. Someone notes the quality of the olives this year. Someone mentions a roof tile that should be checked before winter. Another person nods. The conversation goes on quietly. If you walk again toward the edge of town, the sea may look different now. Boats dark against the water. A line of light moving across small waves. The smell of tar, salt, rope, and drying nets. Men finishing the last small tasks before leaving things for morning. A gull calling once and then quiet again. Or if the town lies inland, the fields beyond it will have their own evening look. Dust settling. Low gold light. Olive trees darkening into steadier shapes. A path back from worked ground. A basket carried home with less urgency now. Inside the house, the meal is ready. People gather. Bowls. Bread. Oil catching lamplight. Steam rising. The first true ease of sitting down after a day of repeated motion. Dinner is not silent, but quieter than the talk of midday. The body is more tired now. What needed to be said earlier has already been said. What remains is enough. A child describes something seen in the street. An older person gently corrects one small detail of it. Someone asks whether the lamp oil is low. Someone says there is enough for tonight. Someone remembers that another jar must be opened tomorrow. This is how a household keeps itself going, not through inspiration, but through memory, habit, and the steady noticing of small needs before they become larger ones. After the meal, the room changes again. Bowls are cleaned. Water is poured into a basin. Leftovers, if there are leftovers, are covered or set aside. A lamp is lit, then another if needed. The glow is softer than daylight, and the house becomes smaller around it. This is the hour for final tasks. A garment folded. A strap checked. Wool put away. A door fastened. A child washed as much as is practical. A stool moved back against the wall. A loom left waiting for morning. A spindle set down at last. Outside, the town quiets street by street. Not all at once. One house still talking. Another already dark. A final step in the lane. A dog turning once in a doorway before settling. A last cup lifted. A distant voice from near the harbor. Then less. Then less again. The air is better now. Cooler. Stone that held heat all day begins to release it slowly into the dark. If the sea is near, its presence seems larger at night. If the hills are near, they become shapes rather than places. Inside, bedding is laid out, blankets unfolded, a bench cleared, a child drowsy before they mean to be. An older person sitting a moment longer in the lamplight before lying down. The lamp flame lowered, the room settling into shadow around it. And now the town is mostly quiet. No speeches. No history being announced. No great event. Just the end of an ordinary day in a small Greek town. Water was carried. Bread was eaten. Thread was spun. Grain was ground. Jars were filled. Oil was poured. A pot was stirred. A street was crossed many times. A market conversation began and ended. Shade was welcomed. The evening meal was shared. The lamp was lit. The door was closed. That is enough for one day. Tomorrow will likely resemble it. The same pale light at dawn. The same jar lifted for water. The same bread. The same olives. The same turning millstone. The same warm walls, the same narrow lane, the same work begun before the heat and resumed after it. And that is how life gathers itself in such a place. Not through one grand moment, but through many small ones arranged in order. So now let the lamplight grow lower. Let the last quiet voices fade into the stone and plaster of the house. Let the streets empty. Let the sea darken, or the fields darken, beyond the town. And let this small Greek town, with its clay jars, olive oil, woven cloth, dusty lanes, shaded courtyards, and evening lamps, drift slowly into sleep. Welcome, and settle in. Tonight, we will spend a very ordinary day in a quiet town of Song Dynasty, China. Nothing remarkable will happen. There will only be dawn, tea, rain on tiled roofs, paper, lantern light, and the slow passage of hours. So let your eyes close, let your breathing ease, and let the day unfold at the pace of a brush moving across paper. Imagine a small town beside fields and low hills, with gray roof tiles, wooden doors, a temple among old trees, and a market street that wakes without hurry. It is an ordinary day, much like the day before, and much like the day after. And that is why it is such a peaceful place to rest. Chapter 1. Before dawn. The town is still dark when the first people wake. The eastern sky is only a softer shade of black, and the roof tiles still hold the coolness of the night. In one small house, a farmer rises from his sleeping mat, reaches for his jacket, and opens the door just enough to feel the damp morning air. The yard smells of wet earth, ash, and leaves. In the kitchen corner, a small fire is lit. Dry twigs catch first, then a thicker piece of wood, and a clay kettle is set above the flame. Water warms slowly, as it has on countless mornings before this one. Tea will come in its own time, before anyone drinks. There are the small preparations that belong only to early morning. A lid is lifted, set down, and lifted again. A bowl is warmed near the kettle. A little grain is measured out by hand, not hurried, not counted aloud, simply known by feel. The fire is watched for a moment, then gently adjusted with a stick, so the heat stays even. In houses like these, morning does not begin with a single act. It begins with several small ones, each quiet enough to be almost forgotten, even while they're being done. A sleeve is tied back. A jar is opened. A cloth is folded once and placed near the table. Someone glances toward the doorway to judge the color of the sky, then returns to the kettle without comment. These are not important tasks in the way histories usually speak of importance. Yet for the people living this day, such tasks are the shape of life itself. Warm water, kindled fire, the first tea, the first look into the yard. A morning is made from these small things long before it is made from anything larger. Nearby, someone lowers a bucket into a well. The rope slides over wood with a low, familiar sound. The bucket rises again, cold and heavy, carrying water for tea, for washing rice, and for rinsing a face still warm from sleep. Beyond the houses, farmers move along narrow paths toward the fields. Their tools rest on shoulders polished smooth by years of use. A hoe, a carrying pole, and a basket with cord handles. Their sandals darken slightly with dew as they cross the grass. Rows of greens lie low to the ground, and the soil, when pressed between thumb and finger, says enough about the day ahead. Back in town, the kettle begins to whisper. Tea leaves go into a bowl. Steam rises in a thin ribbon, and hands gather around the warmth. The first sip tastes grassy, faintly bitter, and gently sweet at the end. The warmth spreads outward slowly, as morning itself spreads across the sky. In the temple courtyard, a monk is already sweeping. The broom draws soft lines over the flagstones, gathering leaves into a shallow heap. Sweep, pause, and sweep again. He moves without hurry, and the task seems less like labor than part of the morning air. Somewhere beyond the roofs, a bell sounds once. It is distant and rounded by the cool air, and when it fades, the darkness has already begun to loosen. Gray becomes pale silver. The day has begun, though only just. Chapter 2. The Morning Market. By the time the light reaches the market street, the town is awake in the mildest possible way. Wooden shutters are opened, door bars are lifted, and a few stalls are unfolded from their night shapes into their day shapes. The street is never loud. Even when busy, it is full of small sounds, rather than large ones. A vegetable seller arranges bundles of greens still cool with moisture. Beside them are pale radishes, spring onions, and round cabbages packed tight as fists. A woman wipes a board with a wet cloth before setting out cakes of tofu. Nearby, jars of soy sauce, vinegar, and bean paste sit in a careful row, giving off their deep, quiet smell. Cloth merchants shake out bolts of hemp and ramie, with a little silk for those who can afford it. The fabric hangs softly in the morning air, while folds are straightened and edges aligned. A merchant steps back, studies the display, and adjusts one corner by only the width of a finger. Tea sellers are among the first to welcome customers. Water is already hot, bowls are warmed, and tea is poured in slow circles. Some people drink standing before beginning work. Others sit beneath the eaves and hold the bowl in both hands, as though there is no better use for a quiet minute. Bargaining is gentle here. One number is suggested, another is offered, and after a shrug or a small smile, a sale is made. Copper coins change hands with a brief metallic sound. Children pass through the street carrying errands, a jar for oil, a wrapped measure of tea, a bundle of scallions, or a folded note. Their sleeves are a little too long, but they know the street well and move through it without fuss. From time to time, a pack animal passes by with balanced bundles tied at its sides. Its hooves make a dull rhythm on packed earth, and no one expects it to move quickly. In an ordinary town, on an ordinary morning, even movement seems to understand the value of moderation. Above the street, bamboo blinds shift slightly at upper windows, smoke from cook fires rises, and breakfast remains simple. Rice gruel, pickled vegetables, perhaps a steamed bun if the morning is long. A brush seller lays out bamboo handles, dark ink sticks, and stacks of paper held flat by a smooth stone. As the sun rises higher, brightness spreads across roof edges and signboards, but the market never loses its calm. Goods are arranged, tea is poured, coins are counted, and greetings are exchanged. Another morning proceeds as so many mornings have proceeded before it, and already the day is leaning gently toward noon. At the edges of the market, where fewer people stop to look, the smallest details remain the most peaceful. A damp footprint fades slowly from stone. A folded cloth waits beneath a counter. A bamboo basket, now half empty, keeps the smell of fresh greens in its woven strips. A tea bowl left on a bench has already cooled enough to lose most of its steam. Even the things not being sold seem to belong to the rhythm of the street. A broom resting against a wall, a coil of rope beside a crate, a balance scale hanging still for a moment between customers, a signboard darkened at the edges by many seasons of rain. Nothing asks to be admired. Everything simply remains where daily use has placed it. If someone were to pass through this market quickly, much of it would seem ordinary enough to miss. But that is exactly what makes it restful. The day is not trying to impress anyone. It is only proceeding in its usual order, with bowls, baskets, coins, cloth, and soft voices repeating themselves from stall to stall. Chapter 3. Midday Stillness. By noon, the town has become quieter, not because everyone is gone, but because warmth and habit have slowed every motion. The market still exists, though in a softer form, with fewer footsteps, lower voices, and longer pauses between small transactions. The sun stands high above the tiled roofs, though today its light is muted by thin cloud. Heat gathers anyway in courtyards, under eaves, and on stone paths. Doors remain only half open, and bamboo blinds are lowered to soften the brightness, casting narrow stripes across wooden floors. At midday in such a town, almost nothing moves quickly. In kitchens, rice has been cooked, broth has been ladled, and simple dishes have been set out in plain bowls. Salted greens, bean curd, and perhaps a little fish if the household is fortunate. People eat without ceremony because ceremony is unnecessary for an ordinary meal. When it ends, bowls are rinsed, chopsticks are set to dry, and a cloth passes once over the table. After the meal, some people rest. A shopkeeper leans back on a stool with his eyes closed. A grandmother sits near a doorway with mending in her lap, though her hand has stopped moving. A child sleeps against a folded cushion, and even the cat in the corner does not bother to change position. Then a light rain begins. It starts so quietly that it is almost mistaken for wind and leaves, but soon it becomes the gentle ticking of drops on roof tiles. Water darkens wood, deepens the color of stone, and leaves behind the cool smell of wet earth. Heat loosens, dust settles, and the whole town seems to breathe more slowly. At the temple, the monk who swept at dawn now sets the broom beneath the covered walkway. Rain beads along the edge of the roof and falls in measured drops. Somewhere inside, a page is turned. Somewhere else, a kettle is reheated. The silence between these small sounds feels especially deep. In the fields, farmers pause beneath straw cloaks or under a rough shelter. Tools are leaned against a post. Water drips from hat brims, and no one seems troubled by the interruption. Rain is simply part of the day, as ordinary as morning tea or the evening lamp. Back in town, the market street has thinned to a line of sheltered figures under awnings. One merchant covers his goods with cloth. Another sits with his hands in his sleeves and watches the rain in complete familiarity. The rain does not grow heavy. It simply continues for a while, laying a thin hush over roofs, gates, leaves, and stone steps, until the softened noon begins to gather itself into afternoon. Chapter 4. The Scholar's Afternoon. In one room near the quieter end of town, a scholar sits at a desk beside an open window. He is not writing a decree or a famous poem. He is copying text, patiently and carefully, one line after another. The afternoon is long enough for such work, and such work is long enough for the afternoon. On the desk are the ordinary companions of study: an inkstone, a water dropper, a brush rest, paperweights, a copied text on one side, and blank paper on the other. Before he begins again, the scholar grinds ink with a little water. The sound is soft and repetitive, one of the quietest kinds of labor, while the scent of soot and resin gradually rises from the darkening pool. The room itself seems arranged for patience. Light enters through the window in a muted sheet, touching the desk first, then the edge of the floor, then the lower part of the wall. Nothing in the room shines brightly. Wood remains matte. Paper remains pale. The ink alone holds a deeper darkness, quiet and still within the stone. Near the desk there may be a narrow shelf with a few rolled texts, a folded cloth, and a small ceramic jar. None of these things is decorative in any grand sense. They are simply useful, familiar, and placed where the hand can reach them without searching. That, too, is a kind of comfort. The comfort of not having to think about where anything belongs. As the afternoon continues, the light changes so slowly that it is almost impossible to notice the moment of change itself. A corner of paper grows softer in tone. The desk edge loses a little brightness. The scholar's sleeve moves through that dimmer light without resistance. Everything in the room seems to agree with the work. Steady, quiet, and in no hurry to become evening. Then the brush is lifted, the tip touches ink, and the first character is begun. There is no rush. A copied text must be clear before it is beautiful, and steady before it is quick. So the brush moves with measured restraint until one character gives way to the next. Outside the window, the rain has thinned into drops falling now and then from the eaves. Bamboo leaves release the last moisture one bead at a time. The courtyard stones are darker than before, and a shallow puddle near the step reflects part of the roof and a pale slice of sky. From the street comes only the occasional sound of sandals on damp ground, a vendor calling once, or a cartwheel turning somewhere at the far end of the lane. Then there is quiet again, quiet enough to hear paper being shifted and a sleeve brushing the edge of the desk. Beside the scholar stands a cup of tea gone only slightly warm. He drinks from it without looking away from his work. Some afternoons are filled with errands. This one is filled with copying, and the copying is enough. A page is completed and set aside. Another blank sheet is laid down. The brush is re-inked, and writing begins again. There is calm in work that repeats without being exactly the same. In the hand repeating, the characters repeating, and each stroke still made only once. Far away, perhaps from the temple, a bell is heard again. The scholar does not stop for it. He simply lets the sound pass through the afternoon, as one more element in a day composed mostly of paper, rain, wood, tea, and silence. Gradually, the light begins to change, and the room turns calmly toward evening. Chapter 5. Dusk and Lanterns. Evening arrives so gradually that, for a little while, no one can say exactly when afternoon ended. The rain has stopped, The air is fresh, and the roof tiles hold a last muted light before turning gray again. In the fields outside town, farmers gather their tools and begin the slow walk home. Mud clings to sandal edges. Sleeves are rolled down again as the air cools, and baskets are checked for what has been harvested. The walk back is slower than the walk out in the morning. Not unhappy, simply tired in the plain, familiar way that comes from ordinary work. At the edge of town, people pass one another with little more than a nod. They have seen one another at wells, at market stalls, and on the paths between plots of land. Nothing particular needs to be reported. In a peaceful place, that is often enough. The market street is changing shape again. Cloth is folded, jars are sealed, boards are wiped down, and the remaining coins are counted with dry fingers before being tied in a small pouch. A tea seller rinses bowls and turns them upside down to dry. Cooking fires brighten in homes one by one. Through half-open doors comes the smell of rice, greens, sesame oil, and warm broth. A knife taps steadily on a board. Lids are lifted and replaced, and evening food remains simple because simplicity is what the hour asks for. In a courtyard, someone washes hands and face from a basin. A child is called inside. Wet clothing is moved a little farther under shelter. For a few minutes, the whole town seems to pause between labor and rest, between daylight and lamplight, between the outside world and the room within. Then the lanterns begin to appear. One under a shop eave, one beside a gate, and one hanging in a corridor, turning the wooden posts amber. They are not brilliant. Their glow is soft, enclosed, and human in scale, making circles of warmth rather than floods of light, while the spaces between them remain dim and gentle. Along one lane, the scholar closes his window and covers his ink. Paper is stacked, brushes are cleaned, and the desk returns to stillness. Work ends not with excitement, but simply because evening has come. At the temple, lantern light shines under the eaves while the courtyard stones continue to dry from the rain. A monk crosses the square with quiet steps. Somewhere deeper in the buildings, a bell is sounded for the evening, and its tone rolls outward over trees, rooftops, lanes, and courtyards. It reaches the town as a gentle rounding off, a soft mark at the end of the day. Supper is eaten. Steam rises from bowls, and sleeves are loosened. There may be a few words about prices, about weather, or about whether tomorrow might be clear. But conversation is light and brief. Soon lamps will burn lower, and soon the town will enter its quietest hours. Chapter 6. Night and Silence. Night settles over the town with great patience. Roof lines become darker shapes against darker air, and beyond the lantern glow, the lanes are already soft with shadow. No part of this feels sudden. The town has been leaning toward sleep since midday. Inside the houses, the final tasks are small and unadorned. Bowls are washed, ashes are banked, a door is checked, a window panel is closed against damp night air, and folded clothing is set within reach for dawn. Mats are laid out, quilts are shaken once, and a child's blanket is smoothed with the full palm of a hand. Outside, the street is not empty all at once. One last passerby goes home with a covered basket. A neighbor slides a bolt into place. Sandals make a fading sound on the lane, then stop. Somewhere farther off, a dog gives a single bark and decides not to continue. Inside the houses, night is full of the smallest possible sounds. A quilt settles. A wooden frame answers the cooling air with a faint, dry click. Someone turns once in sleep, and then becomes still again. A ladle left near the stove touches the side of a pot almost too softly to hear. These sounds do not interrupt the silence. They belong to it. They are what silence becomes when people are living inside it, rather than standing outside it. A town at night is never perfectly empty of sound. It is simply reduced to sounds so light and ordinary that the mind no longer holds on to them. That is why such hours feel so restful. Nothing calls for attention. Nothing demands a response. The world is still present, but only in its softest form, breathing, cooling, settling, and waiting for dawn to arrive again in its own slow time. After rain, the night smells especially clear. Damp tile, cool earth, old timber, moss, a trace of ash, and the faint memory of tea all drift together when a breeze passes through. It is one of those quiet mixtures of scent that seem less like perfume than like the town itself, breathing in sleep. In the temple, the courtyard is fully empty now. The broom rests where it was placed, and the flagstones reflect only the faintest lantern glow from the covered walkway. Somewhere within the buildings, a page may still be turned, but from outside the temple seems made almost entirely of stillness. Far away, a bell sounds once more. At night, bells seem slower than bells in daylight. The sound travels farther, lingers longer, and then fades so completely that it is hard to tell where the tone ended and where silence began. Above the town, clouds drift apart enough to reveal a little moonlight, just enough to silver the upper edges of roof tiles and leave a pale mark on wet stone. Inside one house, breathing has become slow and even. Inside another, a lamp goes out. In another, embers settle softly with almost no sound at all. The scholar sleeps. The merchants sleep. The farmers sleep. The monk, too, will sleep before long. The town that spent the day in work now spends the night in quiet, with one simple hour passing gently into the next. Seen from above, if anyone had been there to see it, the town would have seemed almost motionless now. A few lanterns still glowing faintly under eaves. A few courtyards holding the last trace of dampness from the rain. A few narrow lanes lying in shadow between walls that have kept the warmth of day and are now slowly giving it back to the night. But no one stands above it, and no one needs to. It is enough that the town has settled into itself. The farmers, the merchants, the monk, the scholar, the children, sent on morning errands, the hands that poured tea and counted coins and folded cloth, all have withdrawn into rest. The ordinary day has completed itself without strain, and because it has been so ordinary, it has become especially easy to leave behind. Nothing sharp remains. Nothing unresolved lingers. Only the memory of tiled roofs, damp stone, warm tea, brushed paper, lantern light, and one bell sounding far away in the dark. And now, as the town falls fully silent, you may let it recede into the distance. Let the roofs dim. Let the lanterns go out one by one. Let the temple bell fade into the dark air. There is nothing more to do here tonight. The bowls are washed. The doors are closed. The brush has been set down. You can rest too. Keep only the simplest parts with you. The warmth of tea, rain on gray tiles, a broom on stone, a page turning in a quiet room, and one distant bell. Let all of it grow softer now, softer and farther away, until you drift with it, slowly and comfortably, into sleep. Welcome, and let yourself drift toward an ordinary Roman morning. Nothing urgent waits for us here. We're only going to walk very slowly through the doorway of a comfortable Roman house, a domus, in the early imperial age. The street outside is still dim. The stone threshold is cool underfoot. Inside, the air carries a faint smell of plaster, olive oil, and yesterday's smoke. Ahead is the atrium, the central hall of the house, open above, so that light and rain may enter. In the middle lies the impluvium, the shallow basin that catches the water from the roof opening. For now, it is dark and still. Walk in quietly. There is nowhere to hurry to. This house keeps time not by clocks, but by lamps, footsteps, voices, and the slow movement of daylight across painted walls and mosaic floors. Chapter 1. Before the first light. The household wakes before the sun. It does not wake all at once. A Roman house stirs in layers. First comes the sound of someone rising in the dark, then the soft scrape of a sandal on stone, then the quiet movement of hands that already know their tasks. The paterfamilias, the senior man of the household, is awake before dawn. He does not leap from bed. He sits for a moment and lets the coolness of the hour settle around him. He reaches for the fabric laid out the evening before. Linen first, then wool. If he will wear a toga later, its weight is already familiar to his hands. The cloth never quite forgets its folds. In another part of the house, a servant opens a shutter only a little, just enough to test the sky. Another moves toward the hearth. Fire in a Roman home is not dramatic. It is a duty repeated every day. Ash is shifted aside. A coal is found. Dry kindling is set in place. Careful breath coaxes a small orange glow into life. Soon the kalina, the kitchen, begins to smell of warm clay and wood smoke. A pot is moved. A board is set down. Grain, ground earlier, waits in bowls and jars. Dough is pressed and divided by hands that have done the same work many hundreds of times. Flour settles on wrists and along the edge of the table. Olive oil glints faintly in a small vessel. Someone checks the heat with the back of the hand. Someone else brings water. The smells of wheat, smoke, oil, and warm clay begin to gather in the air. The atrium receives the first weak light from above. The impluvium is pale and still. Water rests in it, with that quiet patience only water seems to have. Now and then a small drip falls from the roof opening. It lands with a soft tapping sound that travels farther in the early hour than it will later in the day. Somewhere a lamp is extinguished. Somewhere else one is trimmed and kept alive a little longer. The house is moving between night and morning. Not yet one thing, not yet the other. In the sleeping rooms, bedding is folded. Covers are shaken once, then smoothed. Chests are opened and shut. Fabric whispers against fabric. Children are woken more slowly than their elders. They sit up, blink into the half-light, and listen for the mood of the household. A busy house has its own morning tone. Even before words, it can be heard in the pace of steps beyond the door. The paterfamilias passes through the atrium. He glances upward through the roof opening. The square of sky is growing lighter. He may pause near the family shrine, perhaps only for a breath, perhaps for a small practiced gesture that does not interrupt the morning at all. Then he continues. The day ahead is not surprising. That is the point. Roman domestic life in a prosperous house is built from repetition. Repetition gives shape to authority. Repetition gives shape to comfort. Outside, the street is beginning to answer the house. A cart somewhere in the distance. A door bolt drawn back. Voices still low, not yet full. Inside, the lamp smoke thins. The bread advances toward baking. The water in the impluvium gives back the first proper light. The house has crossed quietly into morning. Chapter 2. The Salutatio. Now the house becomes less private. The front door is opened with intention. The vestibule no longer belongs only to the household. For a while, it belongs to expectation. Men begin to arrive for the Salutatio, the morning greeting in which clients come to pay respect to their patron. They do not rush in noisily. They gather, wait, and enter in a sequence that feels as familiar as the threshold itself. Sandals meet stone. Hems brush dust from the floor. A servant watches the arrivals and knows many of them by sight. One man coughs softly into his hand. Another adjusts the fold of his garment. Another rehearses, perhaps, the short phrase he means to say. Their business may differ. Their concerns may differ. Yet the ritual remains much the same. In the atrium, morning light has grown stronger. Though it is still gentle, it falls from above onto the impluvium and spreads in pale reflections along the edges of the room. The basin seems to hold a shallow square of sky. Around it, the house presents itself. Painted walls, chests, small tables, lamps and stands. Nothing in such a space is entirely accidental. A Roman atrium is a room for living, but also a room where order can be seen. The paterfamilias stands or sits where he can receive them, perhaps near the tablinum, the room opening off the atrium where household business may be handled. One by one, the clients step forward. A greeting, a few words, a request stated carefully, a favor remembered, a piece of news delivered in a moderate voice. Nothing is shouted. This is not a market. It is a slow exchange of presence, acknowledgement, and dependence. If you listen closely, the sounds are very small. Leather against mosaic. The faint movement of cloth as one man steps aside and another takes his place. A servant's quiet approach. The brief clink of coins or the rustle of something handed over. The drip of water continuing from the impluvium, unchanged by status or ceremony. That drip makes the whole scene feel calmer than the ritual itself might suggest. The business of rank proceeds, but the house remains unexcited. Elsewhere, the rest of the household continues its own mourning. In the Kalena, bread is taken from heat and set aside. Oil is poured. A knife moves through herbs. Someone sweeps a passage. Someone shakes out a cloth in the peristylium, the inner colonnaded courtyard where later light will rest on leaves and stone. Children are kept mostly out of the formal path of callers, though they may hear the murmur from another room and know, by that murmur, what part of the day it is. There is something deeply repetitive about the salutatio. The same hour, the same doorway, the same measured exchange of greeting and obligation. Day after day it returns, not because it is exciting, but because it is expected. Expectation in a Roman household is one of its quiet structures, as familiar as plaster, lamplight, and the daily opening of the door. By the time the last client withdraws, the morning has broadened. The atrium is brighter now. Dust motes pass through the shaft of light above the impluvium. The paterfamilias has completed one of the day's public duties without leaving his own house. The threshold has already done its quiet work for the morning. Soon the household will fold inward again, from reception into work, from greeting into routine, from the formal murmur of clients into the softer sounds of domestic life. Chapter 3. The quiet work of the morning. After the salutatio, the house becomes inward again. Not silent, but inward. The front of the domus has done its work for the day. Now the rhythms behind the reception space take over. A well-to-do Roman house is full of labor that rarely announces itself. It proceeds room by room, hand by hand, as steady as the light moving across the floor. The lady of the house may settle near a place with good light, perhaps where she can observe the life of the home without seeming to interrupt it. Beside her is the wool basket. Wool has weight before it becomes thread. It sits in the hand with a patient resistance. A spindle turns. Fibers are drawn out, narrowed, and twisted. The motion is light, but the work is long. Even in wealthy houses, the presence of woolworking carries an old Roman idea of household order. Basket, thread, and measured attention to cloth all suggest a home that values steadiness. Near her, or somewhere within earshot, enslaved women continue related tasks. Fabric is folded. A hem is examined. A box of pins or weights is opened. Speech stays low. The sound of fiber sliding between fingers is so soft that it is less a sound than a texture in the room. The air smells faintly of wool, oil, and stored cloth. In another part of the house, the children are at lessons. The tutor sits with the patience of someone who knows that teaching is often the art of repeating the same correction in only slightly different words. A child holds a wax tablet on the lap. The stylus presses into the smooth, dark surface. Scratch. Pause. Scratch again. Letters appear one by one, then are rubbed out and formed again. The wax remembers, then forgets, then receives the same line once more. The lesson itself is not dramatic. A phrase copied, a number repeated, a line spoken aloud with more obedience than enthusiasm. The tutor says, not sharply but firmly, that the hand must be steadier. A younger child shifts on the stool. An older one tries to sound more confident than he feels. Outside the room, someone passes carrying a tray. Life goes on around the lesson, which is itself part of life, not set apart from it. In the Collina, the slow preparation for the evening meal has already begun, because a Roman cena, the main dinner of the day, is never assembled all at once. Vegetables are sorted, lentils are inspected, herbs are tied, untied, chopped, and set aside. A mortar receives seeds, leaves, and salt. The pestle turns them into fragrance. Oil catches the light in a narrow-necked vessel. A cook leans over a work surface worn smooth by years of chopping and pressing. The kitchen is warmer now than the atrium. It smells of onion, smoke, warm bread, and the faint sharpness of vinegar. Clay pots wait on shelves. Knives are rinsed. A servant needs something again, perhaps dough for later. Perhaps only a plain mixture of flour and water that must become useful before the day is done. Domestic abundance is made from ordinary motions repeated for a long time. If you move back toward the atrium, the whole house seems to breathe in cycles. The stylus scratches in one room. The spindle turns in another. In the kitchen, a pot lid is lifted and set back down. Overhead, light shifts almost too gradually to notice. On the mosaic, sandals cross and recross paths laid down by earlier feet, by yesterday's feet, by many years of similar mornings. Nothing in this hour needs to astonish us. That is why it soothes. Roman household life on a morning like this is not a sequence of important events. It is the careful holding together of many small continuities. Wool becoming thread, wax receiving letters, bread cooling, herbs waiting for the evening pot. The house does not perform greatness. It performs steadiness. Chapter 4. The midday meal and the hour of rest. By midday, the house is softened. Morning obligations have thinned. The sharper edge of work is gone for a while. This is the hour of prandium, the modest midday meal. It is not the grand meal of the day. It asks for little ceremony. Bread, olives, cheese, fruit, perhaps eggs, perhaps leftovers from the night before. Food that can be set down and taken up without much display. Someone carries a tray through a patch of sunlight. Cups are placed. A loaf is cut. A small knife touches rind and soft cheese. Figs, if they are in season, split open without ceremony. Water is poured, or wine thinned with water in the usual way. No one needs to recline formally for this. The meal is brief by the standards of evening and almost intentionally plain. The children eat with the quick, distracted hunger of those who are not yet interested in the dignity of dining. The adults eat with the relief of a pause earned by repetition rather than struggle. A servant stands nearby, then disappears, then returns. Plates are not heavily burdened. Voices stay low. Midday warmth, or the promise of it, encourages economy in speech. Even the house seems less eager to make sound. After the meal comes the hour of rest. Shutters are adjusted, not fully closed perhaps, but narrowed, so the strongest light does not flood the interior. The atrium changes character under this filtered brightness. Its surfaces appear flatter, its basin darker. The impluvium reflects a smaller piece of sky now. Air hangs warmer above it. Rooms that were active a short while ago become still. A child lies down unwillingly and then, almost at once, is asleep. The tutor is quiet. The wool basket sits where it was left, thread resting on the rim like a task interrupted, but not abandoned. In the Kalina, work continues in slower motions, because food for evening cannot sleep. But even there, the pace is gentler. A pot only murmurs. A spoon touches clay. Nothing clangs. This is one of the most restful things about an old house in the middle of the day. It does not become empty. It becomes suspended. Time passes, but in broad, quiet waves. Heat presses lightly on plaster walls. Sunlight remains outside the shutters, like a patient presence not yet invited in. Somewhere far away in the street, a wheel rolls over stone. Inside, the sound barely enters. If you were to sit in a shaded corner and simply listen, you might hear the smallest details more clearly than at any other point in the day. Water settling in a jar, a bird in the courtyard, a sleeper turning once on a couch. The faint creak of wood as a door shifts in the warmth. The breath of a house at rest is made of these almost invisible sounds. Rest in a Roman household is not an empty gap between activities. It is part of the shape of the day. Morning expands into it. Afternoon will rise out of it. The modest prandium has passed. The heavier work of evening waits at a respectful distance. For now, all is reduced to shade, stillness, and the calm agreement that not every hour must be filled. Chapter 5. The baths in the afternoon. After rest, the day gathers itself again, but never too quickly. Afternoon in a Roman household is quieter than morning and less formal than evening. It has room for small outings. One of the most ordinary of these is a visit to a small public bath in the neighborhood, woven so naturally into daily habit that the outing hardly feels like an event at all. Not everyone must go every day, and not every member of the house will go together. But the possibility of bathing belongs to the texture of the afternoon. So let us imagine a slow departure. Sandals are adjusted. A light cloak is taken up. A servant may accompany, carrying what is needed with no sign that it is a burden. The front door opens once more, but now without the earlier formality of the salutation. The street outside is brighter and more settled. Shops are open. Voices drift. The stones underfoot are warm from the day's sun. The walk itself is part of the calm. A Roman street is never entirely quiet, yet from within the measured pace of an afternoon errand, it can feel almost drowsy. Walls throw back light. Doorways cut the brightness into intervals. Someone passes carrying a basket. Someone else leans in conversation that appears to have no urgent end. Dust lies in the joints between paving stones. Even movement seems coated in warmth. At the bath, there is no need for grandeur. The place is made for repetition, not amazement. One enters, undresses, waits, and steps through the familiar sequence of warmth and water. The heat is different from the heat of the street. It is enclosed, held, and shaped by walls. Moist air touches the skin. Voices sound rounder here. Water answers every motion. There may be brief talk. There may be almost none. Bathing does not require narrative. It requires sequence. Warm water. Oil on the skin. A scraper passing over the arm or shoulder. More water. The pleasant heaviness that follows heat. It is one of the Romans' most practical comforts and one of the calmest. When they return home, the household feels changed without being transformed. Bathing has smoothed the day. Skin is cleaner. Limbs are looser. The light outside has begun the long descent toward evening, and the house receives it differently now than it received the pale light of morning. The atrium is warmer in color. The impluvium reflects gold instead of gray. Shadows in the peristelium lengthen between the columns. Inside, preparations for cena have advanced. The kitchen has moved from groundwork to outcome. Steam lifts more steadily. Dishes meant for serving are wiped and arranged. Someone tastes a sauce and adds a little more of something from a small bowl. The household is turning toward its final substantial act of the day. Afternoon in a Roman house is restful, partly because outside and inside continue to answer one another. You step into the street and then back into the domus. You leave warm stone for cooler shadow, public water for private thresholds, open brightness for the measured light of the atrium. Each return makes the home feel more enclosed, more complete, and more prepared for evening. Chapter 6. The Cena and the Closing of the Day. Evening comes gradually to a Roman house. It does not arrive in a single shadow. First, the upper walls lose some brightness. Then the floor mosaics begin to hold the light, rather than reflect it. Then the corners of rooms ask for lamps. By this hour, the household's attention gathers around Cena, the main meal of the day, more deliberate and more complete than the modest prandium at noon. In the Kalena, the last motions are the most concentrated. Bread that was only promise in the morning is now certainty. Pots are opened. Steam escapes in soft clouds. A ladle moves through something thick and fragrant. Herbs, pounded earlier, have entered the food so fully that they no longer seem separate from it. Olive oil shines on the surface of a dish. Platters are arranged with the ordinary seriousness that attends repeated domestic skill. The triclinium, the dining room with its couches, is made ready. Cushions are adjusted. Tableware catches the dimming light. Even if the family dines simply tonight, the room is prepared as though order itself were part of the meal. If guests are present, the arrangement may be a little more careful. Even then, in our quiet Roman evening, nothing becomes loud. This is not a banquet of spectacle. It is dinner in a prosperous house at the end of a familiar day. Lamps are lit before darkness fully claims the rooms. This, too, is a small ritual. A lamp is taken up. Oil is checked. The wick is trimmed. Flame meets fiber, and the little bowl of light steadies itself. One lamp becomes two. Two become several. Their glow is not broad, but local. It settles on hands, cup rims, the edge of a couch, a painted wall, and the surface of the impluvium if a lamp stands where the water can catch it. During Cena, the meal unfolds more slowly than lunch. Bread is broken. Dishes are offered and received. Wine may be mixed with water. Conversation rises and falls in low waves. A child is corrected gently. Someone reaches across for a bowl and withdraws again. A servant enters, serves, and leaves with practiced quiet. Nothing surprising appears on the table. Yet to the household, this accumulation of warm food, lamplight, and measured company is abundance enough. When the meal is over, the closing of the day begins in earnest. Cups are gathered, leftovers are covered. A cloth passes over wood. Sandals sound more softly now, as though everyone has agreed not to disturb the approaching night. In the atrium, the impluvium has turned dark, its surface catching only fragments of lamp glow and perhaps one small shape of evening sky above. Shutters are closed at dusk, one after another. The sound is simple and satisfying. Wood moves into place. A fastening is checked. The outside world is gently reduced. Street noise becomes distant. The house gathers around its own remaining light. Rooms contract into circles of flame and shadow. Children are led toward sleep, sometimes willingly, sometimes with slow resistance. Their lesson tablets are put away. The stylus rests in its groove. The wool basket is set aside for tomorrow. Thread unfinished, because thread is always waiting for the hand to return. In the kitchen, embers are managed carefully. Not everything is extinguished. A Roman house thinks ahead to morning, even while entering night. At last, the paterfamilias withdraws. The formal weight of the day is over. The greetings have been given. The meal has been eaten. The house has turned from darkness to light and back toward darkness again without any great event. And that is what makes it restful to imagine. A Roman day inside a domus is not built to surprise. It is built to hold authority, to hold labor, to hold warmth, food, routine, and sleep. Outro. The house falls quiet. Now let the lamps grow fewer. Let the last footsteps fade along the mosaic. Let the atrium darken until the impluvium is only a still square of deeper black. The shutters are closed. The wool basket is waiting. The stylus is still. In the Kalena, the embers give off one last low warmth. Above, a small piece of night remains visible where the roof opens to the sky. The Roman house has completed another unremarkable day. Nothing was urgent. Nothing was extraordinary. Only bread, water, wool, wax, lamplight, and the slow return of quiet. Stay there for a moment longer, in that stillness, in that dim, enclosed air of olive oil and cooling plaster. And as the house settles fully into sleep, you may do the same.